All right, Carlos Lugo. As Lisa mentioned, I was with Marriott for quite a while, Wyndham Worldwide, in single digits. Basically, my focus today on what we do is around technology architecture, new builds and conversion builds, portfolio tech assessments, hospitality technology strategy, and in some cases, I do some fractional CIO and CTO type of work as it relates to property ownership groups and management groups as well. All right. All right. So today we are going to be talking about cybersecurity in action, practical protections for hotel operations, and what to do. If you are a hotelier that doesn't have a big IT budget or dedicated IT, etc. So the cyber threat here is really the landscape in hospitality is um, we're being targeted every day, essentially, right? So the hospitality industry is a prime target for cyber criminals due to its constraints in operations and interconnected systems, and we'll get into that. What does that mean? Today, the hotel cyber landscape, hospitality is now one of the top five targeted industries, right? Because we have high turnover, we also have distributed systems plus legacy infrastructure, and that all equals to very high risk, right? And attackers know hotels run 24 by 7 and can't afford downtime, right? So, with valuable customer data at stake, hotels must prioritize cybersecurity measures to safeguard against breaches that can lead to significant financial and reputational damage. Right. So, what does that mean? There's a revenue loss component here, right? There's a direct financial impact on operations when there's a breach. There's increased insurance premiums due to incidents. And then there's loss of future bookings and sales. The trust erosion that comes with that uh, comes in the form of decreased guest loyalty and satisfaction, right? And what really is at stake here is the things that we need to kind of be talking through, which is revenue disruption, right? If, there's some sort of a breach, right? PMS, POS, Wi-Fi is down. All of these things kind of equal to money lost in minutes, right? Um, the decreased guest loyalty and satisfaction is something that is we work so hard to get to every year in the decades that we've been in operation, and it could just be lost just like that. The negative online reviews and reputation will start to plummet, and then it will strain your relationships with stakeholders, right? So, understanding the potential consequences of cyber incidents to hotels, is paramount, right? Your brand reputation disappears faster than revenue, and then compliance implications for either PCI, which is your payment card industry, GDPR, and brand standards, right? These are all problems that something like this can create for you. And then ownership and management companies increasingly become liable, right? One of the things that we're seeing right now in the industry, and I see it now with the Marriotts of this world and the Hiltons and others, where they always had a managed component of your properties and also the franchise side of things. A lot of the managed uh, portfolio properties by the brand, they're starting to give them kind of like a pass. Hey, look, let's just go find yourself a, uh, a management company. You don't have to be managed by the brand, and then deal with that because they're trying to get rid of some of these liabilities coming directly back to the brand and putting that back into the hands of management companies and ownership companies, which is kind of different in a lot of ways than what it's been for a very long time. All right, so I want to give you a real life case here. This happened a couple of years ago. It doesn't seem that far ago, but it's 2013. Now remember, because I was there personally, actually, in an engagement in Vegas during this time, shortly after, right, the breach to the MGM ransomware attack there, which really had a monetary impact of over 100 millions. Now, granted, this is our very, very large operations. They make a lot of money due to their casinos and food and beverage and events that they actually host there. But you know, this loss of revenue, the system downtime resulted in lost revenue estimated around 8.4 million per day, um, which led to an approximately about $100 million loss for the third quarter in 2023, right, for these hotels. The remediation costs here, and I remember because I sat down with the person that actually manages all the systems at MGM, and we were doing this little like speed dating on getting to meet people. What do you do? What are the things that keep you up at night, etc. And my question, the first question, because I just wanted to kind of like level set and just say, hey, talk to me about, what about the ransomware? Did you guys pay the ransom? And she said to me, absolutely not. We didn't do that. We had to rebuild all our systems, somewhere at the tune of 450 servers and infinite hours of work. And then on top of that, they had to play, they had to enjoy the, I guess, what they also had to pay for all the people that were impacted by this with this class action lawsuit with all the data breaches at the tune of $45 million they had to pay back. Now, you may ask, how did the attack happen? How do these things can happen to people that are, make so much money and they presumably, right, all of their systems are secure? No one is safe. This is just the reality of it. And in this particular instance here, the attackers reportedly used information from platforms like LinkedIn to gather details about MGM employees, right? As you can imagine, a lot of us have LinkedIn profiles that could go there and see, hey, where I've been, where have I worked, right? Who I'm connected to, etc., right? And then they actually exploited systems like Okta and Azure environments, which are, multi-factor authentication or a single sign-on, and then Azure environments which actually manage and control your infrastructure and server environment and PC environment in your enterprise or in your operations, right? So social engineering is really what really happened here, and what they use here, this information to impersonate an employee and call the company's IT help desk. Then they gain access, by getting the help desk to, or at least trick them to resetting the employee's password, which granted the attackers access to MGM's internal systems. And then on the ransomware deployment, once they were inside, the attackers deployed ransomware, leading to a widespread system failure across MGM properties. Now, MGM properties, not just the MGM Grand, they have a plethora of properties and thousands of check-ins, thousands of checkouts. I mean, the impact was horrendous, and people would just walk into other places to go get reservations. They lost a ton of not only revenue but loyalty during that process. And I remember this during that time is when Marriott had just announced a partnership with MGM Studio, or MGM's Grand rather, on using the Bomboy platform to basically sell room nights on that platform as well, and trying to gain more room nights. So anyway, all that to say that put a hard pause on that. Now Marriott is also under some breach stuff with the government here, that they have to continue to provide all these data points every year to ensure that they're not also being breached because of all the recent breaches that they had in the past few years. All right, now, so let's get into what are common attack vectors, right? I'm sure some of you have learned or heard about phishing attempts or attacks, social engineering that I just mentioned, on how they trick people to give you name, password, email, etc., and other things. Legacy systems is another one that they're easily exploited. Vendor access and Wi-Fi weakness. So we'll get into some of these right now. So for instance, on the phishing attempts, these phishing schemes, they exploit human error, tricking your staff, even ourselves, right? Like we're not perfect. I'm subject to this every day. We are all subject to either something's been hacked, right? Whether it's your email account or your social media account or something else, and someone pretending to be you. And then tricking them into revealing like sensitive information through deceptive communications. That's really phishing. A lot of times you get that in the form of an email, right? Where it's like, well, it looks like it was Carlos that sent this, but because I exchanged so many emails with Carlos, I just didn't even think about it, and boom. And that actually happened to me and one of my clients one time. We were going into an engagement, We already established that via email. Invoice went out, and they completely ignored all of that and decided to click on a recent email that just came in. That my email address looked very similar, but it wasn't my email address. And they clicked on that, went and made a deposit, never recover their money. And so those situations happen all the time. Vendor access, I'm very keen on this, right? Because a lot of times, a lot of our properties won't have, let's say, a dedicated IT team, and we rely on some vendors to take care of, let's say, our camera system, or come in and do some server maintenance or PC maintenance, or access to other things. So because they have frequent access to hotel systems in a lot of ways, that creates, the potential entry points for attackers if not managed properly. So, a lot of times there's been a password that has administrative rights to your systems, and that vendor fell out of grace with you, or they went out of business, but the password was never changed. And now you have an employee that worked for that company that now has access to your systems, and you had no idea, right? And so we'll talk about how to remediate some of these things here shortly. And let's talk about quickly also about legacy systems, right? Outdated systems often lack modern security features, right? Making them vulnerable to exploitation by cyber criminals. This happens more often than we know, right? A lot of end of life systems, almost every place that I walk to, and I will say 8 times out of 10, they have a lot of the servers that are either they're not paying the licensing or they have been expired, and at that point you can't pull any updates. You can't patch your systems for the latest security vulnerabilities. You're not on the latest software patch or latest operating system for one reason or another, right? And so, not faulting anyone to this, but we're all kind of living in similar spaces in a lot of ways. And then Wi-Fi weaknesses. Unsecure Wi-Fi networks can be also easily compromised, allowing attackers to intercept sensitive guest information. And so, I countless times I see it all the time. Walk into a hotel, tap into their Wi-Fi, no password for you to log in, no form of authentication, or even for you to put in your email and your phone number to at least gain access, right? That's one way that I was thinking, oh man, we could probably exploit, or this system could be exploited. And then two, then it lends itself to the question on, what kind of configurations or misconfigurations are there, right? Are we segmenting our network that if someone logged in through the Wi-Fi, that's not touching your admin network where your property management system and POS and your financial system sit on, et cetera, right? So all those things matter. And these are very common attack vectors that people will exploit, and cyber criminals will exploit at all times. All right, let's talk about some of these key takeaways here. For me, and I will continue to say that forever now, cybersecurity is no longer an IT issue, right? It is an operational continuity issue, right? Every time there's a disruption of operations, this is a operation continuity issue. If we cannot collect credit card payments, if we cannot ring up orders, if we cannot take reservations, if we cannot answer the phone or transfer phone calls, and all these things that are tying out to all your data from the property management system and POS, right? These cyber incidents can paralyze hotel operations, right? Leading to guest dissatisfaction and loss of revenue directly, right? Impacting your bottom line and your top line, right? And so let's get into some of these hidden costs, right? Some of the things you will see, that a lot of people don't talk about when you have some of these cyber breaches out there is your service scores, right? If you're tracking loyalty, service scores, guest satisfaction scores, etc., your weak cyber hygiene leads to poor service scores, right? It really damages your reputation. It reduces guest satisfaction ratings tremendously, right? And the other things that we don't talk about is when your systems are down, right? We have extended wait times, and then that also leads to poor service scores, right? You also have chargebacks, right? For financial disputes, right? When a cyber incident can result in increased chargebacks, significantly impacting revenue and straining operational resources, right? And so now if we were, X amount of money that we were going to make in the first, second, third quarter, well, you could scrap that. You're having to redo all of that, right? And we just don't understand the impact so far of a current breach to what that's going to impact your reputation and your return guests as well, right? And then staff downtime, right? Cybersecurity issues cause staff downtime, disrupting operations and leading to lost productivity and revenue. The staff productivity, that's another one, because now that's a labor component that you're paying people to take care of your guests, to be taking in orders, to making sure that your product is a solid product, and that you're delivering consistently for your guests and for the operation. So you lose that productivity, but you're still paying, right? And then OTA penalties for failed reservations, right? They can't hit the PMS. You can't realize some of these reservations, etc. And then work under, let's say, a brand, right? And your franchisee, right? Franchise audit red flags, right? How is that going to play into your master agreement, right? And your possibilities of renewing this contract if that's something that you desire to do. And then your insurance premiums would exponentially increase, right? And so we're seeing a lot more cybersecurity insurance being passed on to the properties from the brand specifically. The brands don't want to carry the liability, they want to pass it on to somebody else. And so all of these hidden costs are all cyber risk, right? And so avoiding some of these, how proactive we are, will determine, right, what measures we take. And so here's some essential cybersecurity measures that I want to talk about. So, cyber baseline every hotel must meet, right? Update and patch all the systems frequently, right? This is paramount. This is imperative. This is extremely important that you regularly update all software and systems to close vulnerabilities and protect against emerging threats. I understand and that there are certain systems that are so old in some cases that even patching them is not even a possibility anymore. If you've gotten to a place where you can no longer patch your system because, let's say, they're end of life and end of support, meaning the company that produces this product is no longer putting a stamp of, hey, we stand behind this, you need to move to our newest version because we're no longer developing for vulnerabilities, for security, etc. You have to consider doing that, right? And you have to really consider the fact that what's at risk here, right? Which is all the other hidden costs we just talked about. Enforcing a multi-factor authentication type of system across all your systems, right? That just your login and password shouldn't be sufficient. That you should have some sort of authenticator app that once it realizes someone is trying to log in as me, even if it's me, right? That we can take that and say, well, give it to me a step further. Give me an authenticator app, or send me a text message, right, that says, here's a code, or send me an email that says, here's a code because you're trying to gain access here. That should always be a right away. If I didn't do it, someone is attempting to do it, right? And then standardize a password policy. I too often I get, and you guys were smiling because some of us have done this in the past and some of us actually are doing it today. Don't do this. Do not take sticky notes and put your password under the keyboard or stuck to your monitor, right? Or sharing it with somebody else in the organization. Password policies is going to help us as property administrators know that every 90 days everybody has to change their passwords, right? Or something to that effect. You may not be as rigorous as me. You may want to do 120 days. However, in enforcing that password policy, even for people that do the sticky notes and others that do other things, we'll put them in a place where they have to change the password. And these are also opportunities to also coach and train and retrain your team, right? So eliminating unsupported legacy tech, and changing passwords and patching systems. These are all essential cybersecurity measures we can take, right? And so, you know, protecting the guest data is something else that we're doing by taking care of all of that we just mentioned, right? So segmenting the guest Wi-Fi from internal networks really ensures, right, access only is necessary to necessary resources, right? So minimizing exposure to internal systems. I don't want to get too technical here because I don't believe that this is a technical audience, but there may be some techies here. And so segmenting that network means that whoever and whatever touches that Wi-Fi SSID, whether it's guest at my hotel or welcome to my hotel, and you log in, any of that stuff that is segmented, that is not does not have the ability to laterally move into your admin network, right? And so there are ways of doing that and working with the right teams to actually making sure that that data is actually making its way as it should and is not touching any guest data or financial data. Encrypt traffic end to end. So utilizing encryption protocols, right? Protects the guest data during transmission, safeguarding sensitive information from potential breaches. A lot of this happens at a firewall level, and the firewall a lot of times does a lot of the segmentation depending on how you're managing your network. And but without getting too technical, right, and doing some architecture and how you live today, those things can be mitigated, right? Use modern captive portals and secure authentication, and that's what I was talking about just a little bit ago on, how many hotels we all go to that just it gives you a SSID, you log into it. No, it doesn't ask you what room number, what's your name, and that is what that tells me right away. Number one, is not authenticating against the property management system to say, hey, Carlos Lugo's staying here in room 500, and he's only there for 2 days. Give him access for 2 days, right? It doesn't have a way that says, okay, well, I'm trying to get into your Wi-Fi now, but redirect me to a page that portal says, hey, here's a use, just read about here, like the disclaimer that if you log in here, that we're not liable for you and you're connecting here. And two, by the way, give me your email and phone number before we actually can allow you to move forward and jump into our Wi-Fi, right? So implementing those secure portals, right, for transaction enhances data protection, building trust and confidence among your hotel guests. You may not look at it like that, but essentially, someone like me, I don't go on any. I pay for my own virtual private network. I launch my VPNs everywhere I go, and so I don't trust anyone's network unless I've touched that network. And even then, you still have other people and other things that you may not have access to. They had no idea that they had a way in because of the way of configuration. All right. So protecting your hotel operations. Let's talk a little bit about that. So POS, point of sale system, PMS, property management systems, locks, right? Cameras, your HVAC system, all require secure segmentation, right? Which is what we call VLANs, which is your virtual local area network. Think about this as a highway that's got, let's say, 3 or 4 lanes, right? Each lane will be a VLAN, right? So in lane on the left, it could be my property management system data. Middle lane will be POS, right? Right lane will be, let's say, guest data from guest Wi-Fi, and then the 4th lane on the right, let's say, is just my financial data. However you want to segment that, a lot of times it just takes a little bit of thought behind it and someone that really understands how to do it. But without getting too technical on it, implementing VLANs to segment your network, right, is in isolating critical systems such as these POS and PMS for enhanced security is the way to go, right? There's a small picture there on the bottom left that tells you, or at least how to break it down and how to segment those without getting too technical. Zero trust is another way of adopting security standards, where it's not only saying, I know who you are, Carlos, when you're going in and logging in, Carlos at so-and-so and plus my password. but it also understands what should I have access to in the organization, and is my device authenticated or at least part of a allowed group or trusted group in this environment. So it is now we're authenticating in different layers, which is device, user, right? And then maybe another, let's say, logical access, right? Because once I log in, it should tell me, well, only Carlos got access to IT systems, but he can't be looking at the financial systems per se, right? Uh, and there's another picture that kind of depicts that. And then what we call the privileged access, right? Um, which is PAM, privileged access management. Uses privileged access management to control and monitor access to sensitive systems, right? Which, again, is another way of zero trust, sensitive systems, reducing potential risk. And then lastly, continuous monitoring, right? You got tools out there like EDR and MDR solutions on top of the antivirus. And, I will share a list of acronyms to actually after this, so then we can have an understanding of what some of these mean. But EDR essentially and MDR is basically a way of manage and detect risk, right? If there was a breach or there's a computer that's not supposed to be on the network, or endpoint protection, right? It tells us some of these things have been, is there someone that's not supposed to be on here? Is it a computer that's not supposed to be here? Is there someone that's been trying to had multiple failed attempts to log into the network? All these things matter. Now, I want to talk a little bit about that privileged access because I think that ties into controlling vendor access. And vendor access controls, right? Come in different ways, shapes, or forms. But time limited credentials, not everybody has the capability of doing that, which really means is implementing a time limited login, right? And ensures that the vendor has access to only during necessary periods, reducing potential risk. So it could be that their login is only good Monday through Fridays, 9 to 5, right? Because those are the typical times that they'll come. It could be that, hey, they only come once a year, right? Well, let's give them access now, and then let's shut down that account until the next time they come in, and they have to request access via an email that goes, let's say, to the GM, director of finance, etc., whomever, right? Something that could be worked on. So some of the practical steps that we could take for this will be time limited login in Windows, change passwords after the vendor work, disable generic accounts, right? How many times I see generic accounts is called admin as the login, admin as the password, or admin as the login and password is the password. All lowercase, no special characters, etc. So all those things shouldn't be generic accounts. Disabling generic accounts is absolutely something that should be employed right away. And then also having, like we talked a little bit ago about a VPN or MFA required every time. So whether you have a virtual private network that they could log in from the outside of the organization, that is not just, oh, I have a IP address, and once I hit that IP address, I'm right into that system internally, and now I can log in. It should be able to be, passed through what we call NAT, NAT, or natting, right, which is your network address translation, which is if you had a public IP address that you actually hit, now it translates it to something in the inside that is not that public IP address. And then now you have methods of authenticating. And then having a vendor checklist before any project kickoff, right? Who are all the vendors that are going to be involved? Who needs access to what systems for how long and why, right? And someone needs to own that. All right. So let's talk a little bit about incident response here. And we got a few more slides here, and then we can get into some questions. All right, incident response playbook for hotels, right? Your IR plan should include a contact tree, right? With its GM, ops, ownership, IT, brand, whatever, right? Then you should also have 3-tier severity levels, maybe like a low, medium, or high, or cold, hot, very hot, whatever the case may be, right? Also have a clear offline procedures for the front desk in food and beverage, right? That if for some reason we got breached or hacked and the systems are down, what is that standard operating procedure, right? What does that look like if you have to go manually? So often a system will go down, whether it was a breach or not, or an outage. It might have been power related, it might have been a hurricane, right? But in this case, we're talking incident response. We forget that, that we could do things manually. I know that just a little bit tedious, but having that standard operating procedure, how to operate manually, is super important, right? Especially in the Caribbean with storms, power outages, etc. These are things that should be in play, like no question about it. Having guest communication templates that you can easily distribute if and when they're checking in, that you can slide underneath their doors, etc. Right? Because let's say the systems may be all compromised and you can't call them, email them, text them, etc. And then also have like maybe a PCI breach escalation workflow, right? And then an insurance notification protocol, something to that effect, right? Because these things could drag for a long time, and you want to beat a lot of these things to the punch before they make it out to our vendor partners, insurance, etc., before we could get to them, right? All right. Here's a timeline of events, right? And then we'll get into what our 90-day plan should probably look like, right? How the attacks happens, attackers reportedly use information, from platforms like LinkedIn, right? We talked about this earlier on the MGM breach, right? So it was a ransomware infiltrated hotel system, right? Then the response, right? The management initiated recovery protocols, and then the recovery, right? Systems restored with enhanced security. These are the timelines of events, but between all of that, right? There's a lot of moving pieces, right? And the GM, director of finance, ops, everybody should be in the know, right? Because a lot of times these things happen internally, right? And someone allow this to happen, right? It's not just particularly that, hey, we just did this and it came from the outside. A lot of times it was a social engineering aspect that led us to this if you had a lot of these protections in play. All right. So let's talk about what a 90-day plan could look like, right? Let's say days 1 through 30, and things that we could easily do today. They may cost a little bit of money, but not a whole lot, right? And then we can get into some of the other ones that could potentially cost a lot more. So days 1 to 30, implementing a multi-factor authentication type of solution, and start patching your systems, right? So passwords, MFA, vendor access cleanup, we can handle that in a couple of weeks if done right, right? Patch all systems, right? So essentially no firmware updates that need to be conducted, and operating system updates that need to be conducted for your PCs, your servers, your firewalls, your switching gear, etc., right? And then network segmentation audit. Have someone lead the charge that knows what they're asking, what they're doing, that sits on your side of the table to be able to have the right conversations, ask the right questions, and then verify that those things are being done and verified, right? Then days 31 to 60, right? Enhanced training and deploy EDR, right? And so your end protection and response, right? Type of system is important. That's going to tell us whether you have someone trying to breach or there's ransomware on any of your computers or your systems that could take that, quarantine them until you could clean that up and then put them back into production. Staff training, super important. And phishing simulations, right? There are very affordable systems that train your staff on a 30, 60, 90 days, right? Where you get a report that says this person and that person didn't do it. And then you have to have a compliance score every quarter of all green that everybody completed it. I know these things are super important because of the attrition levels, right? We're lucky in a lot of ways that we have employees that have long tenures in the organization, but then we also know that there's a lot of attrition in other places, right? Food and beverage, front desk, housekeeping in a lot of ways. And so people that have access to systems should be continuously trained, right? And should continuously be put to the test in some of these initiatives, right? And also update your IT policies, right? Too often, we might have had an IT policy in HR, where we allowed people in the past to introduce systems to our ecosystem. Those things should no longer be a thing, right? You have employee data, guest data at risk, and those things should not be allowed. You shouldn't allow an employee to bring a system because they're saying this will work better than what we have. Why not explore? Why haven't we tapped into the system that we have to see what else it can do, right? Before using other things. And then lastly, day 61 to 90, conduct, right, an IR workshop and upgrades, right? So your incident response workshop and upgrades. What does a incident response look like? Replace end of life tech, and then align with brand cyber standards. I understand that a lot of times replacing end of life tech requires either a large capital expenditure or a operational expenditure, but then let's work on what that looks like and set the right expectations for what that looks like, right? Because you need to earmark it, you need to get on a cycle, and then a lot of times we don't understand what that cycle may look like, and the desire for the ownership to spend the money and why. So those are super important on the 90-day plan. All right. So here's our last slide here, which is our key takeaways, right? Cybersecurity equals business continuity, small habits, prevent major attacks. Vendors and legacy systems are your biggest risk. And a secure hotel is more profitable and a more reliable hotel. So from a continuity standpoint, cybersecurity is essential for maintaining operational continuity and protecting hotel assets and reputation, right? Your habits, small, consistent cyber hygiene practices can significantly reduce vulnerabilities and enhance overall security posture, not only for you, for your asset, for your guest data, for your payment card industry data, for all those reasons, right? And then lastly, your vendor risk. Managing vendor access is critical as it possesses a significant risk to hotel cybersecurity defenses, right? So if you have any questions, now is the time that we go through that. This slide right here is to how you get in touch with me. You can take a screen, use your QR code, cameras, email us, go to the gainadvisors.com website, or simply just reach out to the CHTA folks, and they'll be able to help as well. Get. All right, the floor is
Thank
open.
you so much, Carlos. My stars. That had a lot of information in there and some stuff that I've learned myself. I'm a small business, but I do have a few. I haven't seen anything come in the section right now, but I have a few questions. As a small business, some of these things, when you were talking about the patching, the multi-factor authentication, and the policy for passwords, are those things that, like, if you don't have an IT person, like, where do you go for that? Is it you go on the internet and just say, where can I buy the? Because I've had to go through multi-factor authenticity when I've been purchasing stuff, but I don't know where to get it if you don't have an IT person.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Because of the nature of what I do, I always say you need to have a trusted advisor, right? The internet, although it has a lot of information, you could be going into a sea of information where now it could paralyze you from, oh, which one is it and why? And
Right.
so a lot of times also is reaching out to a community like CHTA, where you have other hoteliers, right, that are already using it. They can say, I've used this one and I used that one, but I really don't like this one for that reason, which is why we went to that one. And
So it's
so
kind of like your point of sale system and all those other things. You kind of chat with your compadres to see what they've used and what works well.
Correct. And one thing that I always try to remind folks is that if you are also a hotelier or owner or management company that are looking to deploy some of these technologies and you don't have someone guiding you, it's best to get someone to guide you. And the other thing is for a standardization side of things, right? Because if you have multiple, let's say 4, 5, 6 properties, and everybody is using different systems, right? And you wanted to, let's say, send staff from one hotel to the other when they're not busy, and interoperability, rolling up all your financials into one system, it all becomes problematic, right? So the more you standardize across the board into something that will work for all your properties, the better.
Well, and I'm sure it's an investment that you need to consider, but I was asking when you talked about the secure portals, the encryption, the Wi-Fi segmentation, the VLANs, are they expensive? Again, if you've got to go out and get somebody and you don't have an IT person, I mean, I guess it's an investment that you can't afford not to make, but are these expensive sort of endeavors to do, or is it just time consuming?
Yeah, so a great question, Lisa. I think there could be a combination of all of it, right? One, it could be the hotel just did something years ago, and they were just kind of like shooting from the hip on how we manage it. And now you got a good product, and now you're looking to secure guest data, your reputation, your financial systems, etc. That could be an investment depending on the size of your hotel. Let's just use like the case of a 100-room hotel, right? A 100-room hotel on a brand new installation of a Wi-Fi done correctly may cost you $60,000. But that's an investment that's potentially going to last you a good 6 years, right? How you manage that is where I think most of it lies, right? Because you may have great hardware, you may have a great deployment, however, it's completely misconfigured, right? And so configuration could be a portion of that. Whereas in another case, you may not have a good system, and now you need to start looking at how do we bring in a better system, right? In the meantime, do we have the ability to do the VLAN, the patching, and all the stuff? And so on the side of how long does it take? I think a lot of times what requires is someone that can lead the charge and say, we're going to engage every single one of these vendors, because a lot of times, let's go over what it is. We don't do a very good job of managing our vendors, right?
Yeah.
That the vendors are an extension of who we are, what we need. And if we beat them up every time we call them, they don't want to come to the phone, or they don't want to come to property, right? This is an extension of, hey, I hired you to do this job, but I also need to treat that partnership as a partnership, right? Let's meet every 3 months. Let's meet every 6 months. What else you got going on? What have you done for us lately, right? What can we do next to continue to enhance what we have? And I think it just comes with managing your vendors and knowing to ask the right questions and having good follow-up.
Well, a segue right into that. For a small independent property that doesn't have a big IT budget, where do they start? Is it MFA? Is it patching? Is it password standardization?
Yeah, I think I'm a person that believes that the foundation leads to everything, right? And I think that if patching the systems is your easiest way to securing your data and your guest data, however, that will be the first thing I will try to look at and see what kind of a mountain we need to climb, if any, right? And then I will move into MFA and like single sign-on type of solutions, right? Because those are easier to implement, and quick to pick from and deploy. Whereas patching systems requires, hey, if we patch this server, is it good? And okay, well, that server has our financial system, it has our POS because it may be a virtual machine, right? It has our PMS. Are we bringing down the entire operation by doing so, right? And so there's some planning that goes with that, and then some in the right resources to get it done correctly.
Thank you. Great answer. Last question, unless something else pops up. Walking through that 90-day plan, if a GM only has the bandwidth to do one thing in the first 30 days, what should it be?
Well, I will absolutely try to attack, right, an audit of my tech stack, right? Because I think that's going to reveal a lot of what we need to do and in what order, right? Right, like we live in a world with, I've been in hospitality for over 20 plus years. My father's been in hospitality for over 37 years, so I know it's in my blood. I'm from Dominican Republic. That's what we do. I guess what I'm saying is, what I'm going with this is that we live in a world of sentiment, right? It's how we are made out to feel when we go to a property. What did I feel? And then we kind of get entrenched into the feeling of why we did that and why we didn't do it. And we live in a data-driven world now, right? And so we need to be able to match the sentiment to the data and make educated decisions based on what I'm getting from my clientele and my guests, but what I need to do to protect their reputation and ours, right? And those meet with systems.
Once again, very well said, Carlos. Thank you. I learned so much on today's call, and we didn't have a lot of questions, but sometimes that means that you were very succinct in delivering your message. So I'd like to thank CHTA. I'd like to thank you, Nerdine and Omega. Thank you guys so much. And we look forward to the next round of webinars.
Absolutely. This was a lot of fun. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.